My stepdaughter used me as an ATM for 10 years, and I spent $200K on her. I paid $38,000 for her wedding. But when I saw my name wasn't on the invitations and her deadbeat dad's was, I canceled everything at the rehearsal dinner and left her with no wedding. I'm 53 years old. I work as a civil engineer, and I make pretty good money. Honestly, my career has always treated me well. I've been divorced for like 15 years, never had kids of my own, and I guess that's why when I met Rebecca 10 years ago and she had a 2-year-old daughter, Kimberly, I thought I'd finally have that family I never formed. How stupid I was, seriously. I met Rebecca at a networking event. She was an administrative assistant at a small company that went under like a year into us dating, and since then she never worked again. I didn't have a problem with that. Honestly, I made enough for both of us and for Kimberly. And Rebecca said she wanted to focus on being a good mother and supporting me with the house and stuff like that. Kimberly lived with us Monday through Thursday, and on weekends she'd go to her biological dad's, Paul, a guy who was basically a walking disaster, but who Kimberly talked about like he was a war hero or something. Paul. I mean, this guy was something incredible. He works in construction, makes minimum wage when he works because half the time he's unemployed, lives in a shitty apartment with 2 other guys, drives a '98 car that looks like it's going to fall apart any second, and when Kimberly was little, he literally disappeared for 2 full years without paying child support or anything. But every time he'd show up with some cheap gift from Walmart or take her out for pizza, Kimberly would act like he was father of the year. Me, who paid for her private school, her braces, her piano lessons, her summer camps, everything. I was just Kenneth, the guy who lives with Mom. Don't get me wrong, I never tried to force anything. I never asked her to call me Dad or anything like that. I understood she had a father and I respected that, but I thought that over time she'd see who was really there for her. You know what I mean? Rebecca would always tell me, give her time, she knows everything you do for us, it's just hard for her, because Paul is her dad. And I'd accept that, like, okay, I can live being the provider without recognition. After all, I wasn't doing it for gratitude, but because I loved them. Or at least that's what I told myself. When Kimberly turned 18 and graduated high school, obviously the college topic came up. She wanted to go to a state university that cost like $40,000 total for all 4 years, living on campus and everything. Paul didn't contribute a single cent. Obviously, the guy can barely pay his own rent. Rebecca looked at me with those eyes and said, "You know I don't have any way to help her." And I, like the idiot I am, said yes, that I'd take care of it. I paid the full $40,000. $40,000. Out of my pocket. So, this girl could get her college degree without student debt, something I didn't even have because I had to pay my own loans until I was 35. And not only that, when she turned 19 and needed a car to get to and from college, guess who? He bought her a used 2018 Honda Civic in excellent condition for $15,000. Yeah, yours truly. Paul showed up that day with a tree-shaped air freshener for the car, and Kimberly hugged him like he'd paid for the vehicle. I was standing there with the keys in my hand, feeling like a dealership employee delivering a car. During these 10 years, I calculate I easily spent about $200,000 on Kimberly between school, college, car, clothes, trips, her phone, her health insurance because Rebecca didn't have a job and I had her on my plan, everything. $200,000 on a girl who saw me as the guy who pays the bills. And I accepted it because, I don't know. I guess I thought at some point she'd mature and understand, or at least show some genuine gratitude. Last year, Kimberly graduated from college with a marketing degree that hasn't helped her get a job yet. She's living with us again because she can't afford an apartment. And this February, she came home all excited saying her boyfriend, a guy named David who she met in college and who works in sales or something, had proposed to her. Rebecca was crying with happiness. I congratulated them. We toasted with champagne. Like a week later, Kimberly and Rebecca were in the living room, looking through wedding magazines and talking about venues and dresses and flowers, and I was listening from the study, and at some point Kimberly said, "We want to have the wedding on August 3rd. We need to hurry, because that's in 6 months." Rebecca said something about the budget, and Kimberly, very casually, said, "Well, Kenneth's going to pay, right?" And Rebecca responded, "Of course, Mija. He always supports us. They never asked me. They just assumed. And I, because I'm apparently an imbecile, didn't say anything at that moment. I stayed in the study thinking, well, it's her wedding. It's an important moment. I can make this one last big expense and that's it. I calculated a decent wedding would cost between $30,000 and $40,000, which was a lot of money, but technically I could afford it without going into debt. So, that night at dinner I said, okay, I'll pay for the wedding, but I want to be involved in the budget to make sure it's something reasonable. Kimberly gave me a quick hug, said thanks Kenneth, you're the best, and kept talking to Rebecca about the dress she wanted. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. Kimberly chose a venue that cost $15,000 just for the space rental, a photographer for $4,000, a dress for $3,000, obviously everything as expensive as she could find. Every time I suggested more economical alternatives, Rebecca would say, Kenneth, don't be like that. It's her special day. She only gets married once. And I'd give in, again and again and again. By May, we'd already spent like $38,000 on deposits and partial payments to vendors, all coming out of my bank account. At some point, I told Kimberly, hey, since we're planning this wedding for 250 people, I'd like to invite some of my friends and colleagues, like 20 people. She looked at me like I'd asked for something ridiculous and said, Kenneth, the guest list is already super tight. I'll see what I can do. I thought, tight with 250 people? Sure, but okay, I'll see how many of my 20 can fit. 2 weeks went by and we never returned to the topic. One day I was at work and my friend Ryan, who I've worked with for 15 years, a guy who's been to my house 1,000 times, tells me, hey man, congratulations. I saw that Kimberly's getting married. I tell him, yeah, thanks. Did you get your invitation? And he tells me, no, I just got a wedding announcement, one of those that people send when they're not inviting you but want you to know they're getting married and maybe send a gift. I froze. Ryan noticed my face and said, wait, am I supposed to be invited? And I didn't know what to say. I told him I'd check and left his office feeling like an idiot. I got home that night and searched through the mail until I found one of those announcements Kimberly had sent. I opened it and there it was, printed in elegant letters. Rebecca Martinez and Paul Thompson have the honor of inviting you to the wedding of their daughter Kimberly Marie Thompson to David Anderson. Rebecca Martinez and Paul Thompson. My name wasn't even there. Paul's name. The same Paul who hadn't put a single cent toward this wedding, who disappeared from Kimberly's life for years, who lives in a dump and drives a piece of junk. That Paul was on the announcement as the bride's father along with Rebecca. And I, Kenneth Richardson, the one who paid for everything, who was there every day for 10 years, didn't even deserve a mention. That night, I waited for Rebecca to get home from wherever she'd been. When she came in, I showed her the announcement and said, want to explain this to me? She looked at it and went pale. She started with, oh, Kenneth, that's just protocol, since Paul is the biological father, his name has to be there. I told her, Rebecca, I'm paying for every cent of this wedding. I just spent $38,000, and my name isn't even on here. What kind of protocol is that? She said, Kimberly had insisted it be that way because she didn't want Paul to feel bad, and I just laughed, like a bitter laugh, and told her, and what about me? How am I supposed to feel? Rebecca tried to hug me and tell me I knew they appreciated me, that it wasn't about that it was just a piece of paper. I asked her about my 20 guests. She got uncomfortable and said they'd had to make cuts, that the list was really tight, that my friends didn't make the final cut. I said, are you telling me that none of my 20 guests are at a 250-person wedding that I'm paying for? She didn't say anything, just went to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room until like 3 inches the morning thinking about everything, about every dollar I'd spent, about every time I stayed quiet when they treated me like an ATM. About how for 10 years I put Kimberly's needs before my own. I missed out on trips. I missed out on buying things I wanted. I missed out on going out with my friends because I was always paying for something for them. And for what? So they could erase me from the wedding announcement and remove me from the guest list of my own family. A week later, Rebecca and Kimberly tell me that David's parents, her fiancé, invited us to dinner at their house. I really didn't want to go, but Rebecca said it was important, that we needed to get to know the in-laws better. So we went. David's parents, Margaret and Robert, were nice people. They had a nice house. They received us well. We had dinner. The conversation was good at first. After dinner, we were all in the living room, and Kimberly, all excited, says, "I have something to announce. I've decided who's going to walk me down the aisle." We all looked at her waiting, and she says, with a huge smile, "My dad Paul is going to walk with me." Rebecca started clapping and saying, "How lovely, Mija." Margaret and Robert congratulated Kimberly, and I sat there feeling like I'd been kicked in the stomach. David, the fiancé, looked at me uncomfortably because even he knew I'd paid for everything. No one else seemed to notice how absurd the situation was. Paul, who had contributed neither morally nor financially almost ever in Kimberly's life, was going to have the honor of walking her down the aisle, while I, after 10 years and $200,000 invested, was going to be sitting in the audience if they even let me into my own wedding that I was paying for. Something in me broke at that moment. I stood up, raised my wine glass, and said, "I'd like to make a toast." Everyone raised their glasses expecting something nice. I said, "I want to toast to Kimberly and David and to this beautiful wedding that's going to be celebrated on August 3rd. It's wonderful that Paul, Kimberly's biological father, is going to walk her down the aisle on this special day. And since Paul will have that important honor, I'm sure he'll also want to assume the financial responsibility for this wedding. So, I want to announce that I'm no longer going to pay a single cent more." The silence that followed was brutal. Rebecca went white. Kimberly looked at me with her mouth open. Margaret, David's mom, said something like, "Excuse me, what?" And I continued, very calmly, "Yes, I've reconsidered my position. I've invested $38,000 so far in this wedding, and that ends today. I'm going to cancel all the vendors tomorrow and recover whatever deposits I can recover. The rest of the money, you'll have to get yourselves." And with that, I left. I literally walked to the door, left the house, got in my car, and drove off. Rebecca arrived like an hour later, screaming, crying, saying, "How could I humiliate her like that? How could I be so cruel?" I told her very calmly, "Rebecca, for 10 years I've paid for everything for you and your daughter, and I've never asked for anything in return except a minimum of respect. And you can't even give me that. My name isn't on the wedding announcements, my friends aren't invited, and now I'm not even going to walk Kimberly down the aisle, even though I'm the one who's acted as a father these 10 years, while Paul strutted around coming in and out of her life when it was convenient for him. So no, it's over." She tried everything. She told me I didn't understand the father-daughter relationship, that Paul was important to Kimberly, even though he hadn't always been present, that I was being vindictive. I told her, "Vindictive? Vindictive is refusing to keep paying for people who treat me like garbage? That's not revenge, it's dignity." Kimberly arrived like 20 minutes later, also crying, and started yelling at me that I was selfish, that I was ruining her wedding because of my ego, that I always knew Paul was her dad, and that I never tried to replace him. I told her, "Kimberly, you're right, I never tried to replace him. But honestly, I thought that after 10 years of paying for your education, your car, your entire life, I deserved something more than being treated like a stranger at your wedding." She said I was being dramatic, that she did appreciate me, but she couldn't give Paul's role away just for money. And I told her, "That's perfect. Let Paul give you the role and the money then." The next morning, and I'm not proud of this, but I don't regret it either, I called every vendor. I canceled the venue, the photographer, the catering, the flowers, everything. Some returned the deposits minus a cancellation fee, others kept everything because we were already too close to the date. In total, I recovered like $22,000 of the $38,000 I'd spent. I also went to the bank and transferred all the money from the joint account I had with Rebecca to a new account in my name only. It was like $40,000 I'd put there for emergencies. When Rebecca found out, she came to the house hysterical. I told her that money was mine, that I'd earned it, and that I wasn't going to finance her life anymore. I told her she had a month to find a job and another place to live, her and Kimberly. She told me I couldn't kick them out like that. How could I be so cruel? I told her, "Rebecca, I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you a month to sort out your situation, which is more than many would do." Paul had the nerve to call me like 3 days later. He told me, Hey, Kenneth. I know things are tense, but you should reconsider the wedding thing. Kimberly is devastated. I told him, Paul, great that you're calling. I precisely wanted to talk to you about this. Since you're going to walk Kimberly down the aisle, how much are you going to put in for the wedding? He went quiet and then said, Man, you know I don't have that kind of money right now. But if you could help a little more? And I interrupted him and told him, Paul, go fuck yourself, and hung up. It was incredibly satisfying. Kimberly called me a few days later, no longer yelling but crying, saying I'd ruined her life, that because of me, she and David were fighting because his family thought we were a mess, that she wasn't going to be able to get married. How could I do this to her? I told her, Kimberly, for 10 years I did everything for you, and you repaid me by treating me like I was invisible. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. She told me I was a monster and hung up. Rebecca and Kimberly packed and left my house like 2 weeks after all this. I don't know where they went. I assume with Paul or with some relative of Rebecca's. Honestly, I didn't care. When they left, I changed the locks on the house immediately, not because I thought they'd try to break in, but because I wanted it to be clear that that chapter was closed. Rebecca sent me a letter like a month later, a physical letter in the mail, saying Kimberly was depressed, that she'd been going to therapy, that I had caused trauma in her by withdrawing my support so abruptly. How could I live with myself knowing I'd hurt a girl who saw me as a father figure? I laughed when I read that, like, father figure? A father figure isn't just the guy who pays the bills. A father figure is someone you respect, admire, genuinely include in your life. I was a bank, not a father figure. I threw the letter in the trash. Last week, Ryan called me and told me, Hey, did you hear they canceled Kimberly's wedding? Apparently, they couldn't reorganize everything with such little time, and without the money, I'd withdrawn. David, the fiancé, according to what Ryan heard from someone who knows the family, told Kimberly they needed to wait until they had financial and emotional stability. Basically, the wedding fell apart completely. I'm not gonna lie, I felt enormous satisfaction when I found out. Rebecca sent me a text like 3 days ago saying she and Kimberly are moving to another state to start over, that I won, that she hopes I'm happy. I didn't respond. I have nothing to say to her. I blocked her number after reading the message. My life now is incredibly peaceful. The house is quiet. There's no drama. No having to go around paying for things for people who don't appreciate you. No having to put up with disrespect and lack of respect, disguised as complicated family dynamics. I've been going out more with my friends. I've picked up some hobbies I'd dropped. I'm even thinking about taking a trip to Europe that I'd postponed for years, because there was always some expense related to Kimberly that had priority. Do I feel guilty? Sometimes. I'm not going to lie. At night sometimes, I think if I was too harsh, if I should have handled things differently. But then I remember the wedding announcement without my name. I remember my 20 guests who didn't fit into a 250-person wedding. I remember Kimberly announcing that Paul would walk her down the aisle without even considering how I was going to feel, and the guilt goes away. I did what I had to do. I got rid of 2 people who saw me as a walking ATM, and I got my life back. If that makes me a monster according to them, so be it. At least now, I'm a monster with money in the bank, and my dignity intact.